Hi, I'm Tyler, and welcome to another episode of my Christian Media Week reviews. Each week I take 5 releases, be it LGBs or singles, and after I listen to them all week, I come back here and I review them. I share what I think about them. So without further ado, let's get to this week's first release. Housefire's new album, How to Start a Housefire, Part 2. Housefire's new album, How to Start a Housefire, Part 2. If you want to go back and hear my thoughts on how to start a house fire, I reviewed that album, and you can go back and check it out after we're done. But let's talk about part 2 here. So, while I liked part 1, I really wasn't a very big fan of part 2, to be honest. Good songs, and I was really into the sound for the first few songs. But then, after a while, it gets kind of mellow, really drags out. The album's almost 2 hours long, so wasn't my favorite album, unfortunately. Stylistically here, a worship sound that is pretty soft, very piano driven, incorporates elements of contemporary, and alternative. The gospel elements are here as well, just like they were in part 1, but not as prevalent, I would say, here on part 2. There's also a gospel choir at some points here. And as for the lyrics here, so, even though the sound wasn't necessarily my favorite, I love the lyrics here. And if I had to sum up the themes of part 1 and part 2 in one word for each part, I would say part 1, we saw a lot of talk about surrender. Part 2, I think, talks a little bit more about revival here. And as for the lyrics here, Housefires talks about how when anxious, impossible, hard times wear us out and leave us weak, Jesus in his love drew his blood on the cross is faithfully with us to reconcile us, to know God, and revive us free from our sinful past, to live a joyful new life where we follow him, as we trust he will keep his promises to guide us, protect us, give us strength, and fight for us to be restored through it all. Up next, the anniversary deluxe edition of Ann Wilson's debut album, My Jesus. Ann Wilson put out her debut album, My Jesus, 1 year ago. And to celebrate, she put out an anniversary deluxe edition of this album. Let's dive into it. Pretty good regular edition of the album it was a year ago, and a year later, pretty good anniversary deluxe edition. So what's new on the deluxe edition? We have 2 new songs, both of which are pretty good. Living Water, which has a contemporary Southern gospel feel, and Still God, which has a contemporary country ballad feel to it. We have a live version of My Jesus from Ann's home state of Kentucky, which sounds similar to the studio version of this song, except for a few changes. There's a new intro. Basically, there's a sample of the song at the beginning of the live version, but sounds very similar for the most part, except for the bass guitar also giving the live version more of an R&B feel. And plus, the end part is sung in a different note as she kind of brings it back a little bit. Pretty cool change up. And then there are the new versions of Hey Girl from the Hey Girl EP, which are good versions. There's a Kentucky version of Hey Girl, which is kind of more of an acoustic country feel. Kind of different to hear this song played acoustically, especially with the electric guitar being so driving in the original version. But pretty good acoustic version here, I would say. And then there's a live version of Rock the South, which by contrast makes this southern pop rock song more of a southern rock song with the electric guitar coming in so strong. And then the radio version of Hey Girl, which sounds pretty much the same as the original version of Hey Girl. The only changes, I would say, is that it's a little more polished, a little more radio ready here. And then the live versions of the My Jesus Live from Nashville EP, which sound pretty much the same as the original versions. We also get another song that wasn't on the original full-length album, and that's a southern rock cover of Little Big Town's song Boondocks. And as for the lyrics here, love the lyrics here. There are so many quotable lines here on this album, but as usual, I'm just gonna give you a summary here. And as for the lyrics here, Ann Wilson talks about how when we're worn out from pain and sin's shame, we can put our trust in Jesus to win his love through his work on the cross and in his resurrection to work it into good by saving us free from that, to change us into God's children who reflect that love by being encouraged to trust that he is faithfully with us to restore us from the pain, and trusting that one day we will be reunited with our loved ones that we miss in heaven. Up next, Meredith Andrews' double single, God of the Living. So before I dive into my thoughts on Meredith Andrews' double single, God of the Living, let me just thank Christian Music Girl for requesting me to review this double single. Now let's dive into it. So, really good news, pretty good new songs here. Both God of the Living and My Undoing. Stylistically here, both contemporary worship ballads. And as for the lyrics here, love the lyrics to both of these singles. Really feel like it's kind of relevant for my life right now. So I was pretty moved the first time I heard both of these songs. And as for the lyrics here, Meredith Andrews talks about how God is reviving her to embrace his love as she surrenders in faith to Jesus to miraculously restore her dreams. Up next, Bizzle's new album, Lightworks 3. Bizzle's album, Lightworks 3. Let's dive into it. So, pretty good album here, stylistically, definitely a collection of hip-hop bangers that incorporate elements of trap, R&B, pop, and later on in the album, lo-fi. Vocally here, Bizzle raps, and sings. And as for the lyrics here, pretty good lyrics here. Really like the change that Jesus put in Bizzle that is displayed here on this album, along with Bizzle's heart to share the gospel with people. And as for the lyrics here, Bizzle talks about how God in his love, through Jesus Christ's death on the cross, faithfully pursued Bizzle to forgive and change Bizzle from his deadly sinful past to live a new life where Bizzle trusts in God to overcome the devil's opposition as Bizzle serves Jesus through music by reflecting that saving love and sharing this truth till Jesus comes back, that people need to be saved from death and hell. Up next, our last release for today, Gable Price and Friends' new EP, Live at the End. So before I dive into my thoughts on Gable Price and Friends' new EP, Live at the End, which includes live versions of songs from their latest album, The Consequences of Being Alive, let me just say how I decided to review this EP. So, y'all might remember when Caleb requested Ann Wilson's Christmas EP around Thanksgiving last year. At that same time, he and his cousin, who is a good friend of mine, suggested that Caleb would like to hear me review Gable Price and Friends' new album, The Consequences of Being Alive, that I mentioned beforehand. So I had the album saved on my phone for a bonus review somewhere down the line, but life got busy. I never really got around to it, unfortunately. So, looking at this EP, which contains live versions of half of the songs, I feel like This is my way to make it up to you, Caleb. So let's dive into my thoughts on this EP here. So, pretty good EP here. Seems like Gable, Price, and Friends would put on a fun live show. Stylistically, alternative pop rock with emphasis on the rock side of that pop rock equation here. And as for the lyrics here, pretty good lyrics here. Can be a little hard to understand the exact meaning of these songs, for me anyways, at first. But once you do understand what these songs mean, there's a pretty good message here. And as for the lyrics here, Gable talks about how when we get knocked into hopeless pain by chasing what is temporary, we can judge others to hide the pain and hide from God, and others who just want to pull us out of the pain and fight with us through the pain. Well, that's it for this week. Come back next week for 5 more releases. If you like what's on this video, please subscribe. I put out videos every Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Also, if you have any thoughts on today's releases or what I said about them, let me know in the comments below. Also, in the comments, you can let me know if there's any awesome releases that came out today that you want to see in next week's video. Also, check out the playlist section for my Music Month and Dreams playlist available here on YouTube and also on Spotify. And this month's edition of the playlist includes songs from artists like Ryan Stevenson, Colton Dixon, and Lydia Laird. And that edition of the playlist is going to remain up through the end of the weekend. And on Monday, my May edition, showing what I've been listening to in April for the Music Month and Dreams playlist, will be out. So be on the lookout for that. Well, go now. See you next week. Bye.